a nice relaxing ride along the Lackawanna River to Holly. And once we arrive at Holly, we'll be stopped for a moment. We call that the passenger participation part of the day. We have a giant harness for everybody. We're going to hook you up all to the train and pull it all the way back up here to Homestead. That's it. So we stop for a moment, we'll change direction, and we should be back just about on time. We are passing one of our highlights on the trip right now. This is the Central Wayne Sewer Authority. It's our local sewage and treatment plant. They just went through a multi-million-dollar renovation, and they're quite proud of it. So they ask us to point it out every time we go by. Now the guys that work here are the biggest and reddest tomatoes shown at the county fair every August, and they quite haven't figured out what the secret is yet. Is the town of Homestead. Now Homestead is known as the birthplace of the American Railroad. On August 8, 1829, so 191 years ago this past August, the first commercial steam locomotive to turn wheels on rails in the entire Western Hemisphere happened right where we got on the train. There's a locomotive by the name of Stourbridge Lion. Now the reason they called it Stourbridge Lion was two reasons. Number one, the locomotive was built in Stourbridge, England. Of course, our really good friends across the pond say Stourbridge. We've had multiple families from Stourbridge over the years come ride our trains because it shares the same name as a small town in England. Now the second part of the name Lion. Well, somebody got bored and they painted a face of a lion. Yes, like lions and tigers and bears, oh my, on the front of the locomotive. So they dubbed the locomotive the Stourbridge Lion, and the name stuck. Now before we had the railroad here at Homestead, we had the Delaware and Hudson Canal. The D&H Canal is known by it ran for 108 miles, and it ran from Homestead to Kingston, New York on the Hudson River. Now the primary reason for the canal was to haul anthracite coal to the New York City market. One itsy-bitsy teeny-weeny little problem though, we don't have any coal here in Homestead. That's all over the Lackawanna Valley area, the Scranton area. So having got the coal to Homestead, the Delaware and Hudson built what they call a gravity railroad. That gravity railroad is basically a giant roller coaster. The coal cars were loaded in the town of Carbondale and dragged up to the top of the mountain. And once they got to the top of the mountain, they free fall down the other side, coming to Homestead. Now if you think of that as a roller coaster, we're all sitting there going, choo, 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 choo. They get to the top of the hill and everybody else, woo! Going down the other side. Well, it's the same way the gravity railroad works, but nobody's saying we, because they see hundreds and they weren't quite having fun back then. So once the coal arrived at Homestead, it's offloaded onto the canal and taken down to the New York City market. Now the D&H Canal was in operation from 1826 to 1899. The canal though had two very big shortcomings. Number one, the canal is filled with slack water. Now what does slack water do when it gets cold? It freezes. So the canal was only usable between April and November every year. Now when do you need anthracite coal to heat your house? Well, between November and April every year. So the canal ran the exact opposite than the peak demand of coal was. To help combat that, the gravity railroad ran all winter long, making our parking lot back at Homestead the world's largest coal stockpile at one time. And once the canal thawed out in the spring, they started loading up the boats to take down to the New York City market. Now the second problem of the canal was the top speed of the canal. Top speed on the canal was a life-breaking 3 miles an hour. So going 108 miles at 3 miles an hour. Along with that, there's 108 locks there to stop and change the water level is. It took them 7 days to get from Homestead to Kingston on the canal. And the canal was in operation 6 days a week, Monday through Saturday, dawn until dusk. So that's why the Delaware and Hudson hired an individual by the name of Horatio Allen. And they sent Mr. Allen to England to buy a couple steam locomotives. So that first steam locomotive Mr. Allen bought was the Stourbridge Lion. He had purchased the locomotive, had it shipped back to America, where it arrived in New York Harbor. Then it was brought up the Hudson River, placed on the canal at Kingston, and brought up here to Homestead, where it was placed on the wooden rails of the gravity railroad. So the Lion burned to life on August 8, 1829. And now that was actually the only day the locomotive operated. Now the locomotive performed flawlessly exactly how it was designed to. The issue was, well, they didn't take into account that the British tons are just a little bit heavier than the American tons. What should have weighed 4.5 tons actually weighed 9 tons, and it was just a little too heavy for the wooden rails of the gravity railroad. So they still ran the locomotive that day, and it did work, but it basically destroyed the rails as it went along. So the locomotive was taken off the wooden rails of the gravity and used as a stationary steam locomotive on one of the inclined planes. Now the remaining parts of that original locomotive are owned by the Smithsonian Institute and on display at the Baltimore, Ohio Railway Museum in Baltimore, Maryland. Our Wayne County Historical Society is at the Main Street, Honesdale. That's a full-scale replica of Stourbridge plant that was built in 1929. Now the tracks we're riding on today were originally laid in the 1860s by the Erie Railroad Company. And every mile on the river side, you might notice already, there's a concrete post about 3 foot tall, the letters JC and a 3-digit number. Now JC stands for Jersey City, New Jersey, and that 3-digit number tells you, well, how many miles away from Jersey City you are. We're currently displaying mile marker 132 and 131. Now you might ask yourself, well, why do we really care about how far away from Jersey City we are? Well, the really simple answer, folks, is so we don't get too close. I just joking. So Jersey City was the end of the line, the most eastern part of the Erie. So when it tracked miles to know where a train was on a certain piece of track, it was how many miles away from Jersey City you were. So we started out in Huntsville, just short of mile marker 136. And we'll arrive at Holly right before mile marker 126. So you keep tracking the mile markers as we go along, and you don't have to ask, are we there yet? Now the river we follow for most of our journey today is the Lackawaxen River. And the Lackawaxen River starts in the northern part of Wayne County, comes down close through Honesdale, down through Holly, to the town of Lackawaxen, where it meets the Delaware River. We've got a great amount of wildlife that lives along the river. Duck, geese, bear, deer, great little herons, beavers, turtles, the wild American fishermen. We might see some along the river today, and we have a very good chance to see a bald eagle or two. We do have several bald eagles nests along the railroad, and we typically do see a bald eagle every time we go out. Now if we do see a bald eagle today, it's a $5 head charge for every eagle we see, and don't mind me hanging off the train holding it straight to its wings. So that's it for my really lousy jokes here for a little bit, but thanks for coming out. Let's sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride.